Regional government. On April 21, 1935, the New York Times Magazine published a plan in which the states would merge into new units called federal regions that would be controlled from Washington, D.C. In 1959, Nelson Rockefeller called for an advisory commission on intergovernmental relations, ACIR, which became a federally funded Rockefeller think tank within Congress to prepare a working formula for the concept. The ACIR analyzed information produced by the Public Administration Clearing House, also known as the 1313, and translated it into legislation to develop regional government, which would usurp the power of the local government. The Clearing House, located at the Rockefeller-controlled University of Chicago, represented a group of 26 private organizations which had been infiltrating local government agencies to usurp their power and authority. Some of these organizations are National Association of Counties, National League of Cities, U.S. Conference of Mayors, American Public Works Association, Public Personnel Association, National Association of Attorney Generals, and the National Governors Conference. Their purpose was to train and place a new administrative class in every level of government, which would replace elected officials. On March 27, 1969, as published in the Federal Register, under the direction of his Illuminati advisors, President Nixon announced the restructuring of government service systems, which called for the merging of states into 8 federally controlled regions. An executive order, when decreed by the President, is printed in the Federal Register, and then becomes law 15 days later. After Bill Clinton signed Executive Order No. 13,083, presidential aide Paul Begala was overheard saying, "Stroke of a pen, law of the land. Kinda cool. Quat." Executive Order No. 11,647 was signed by Nixon on February 10, 1972, establishing federal regional councils for the development of closer working relationships between major federal grant-making agencies of state and local government. In each of the 10 standard federal regions, there was to be a council made up of the directors of the regional offices of Department of Labor, Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, Department of Housing and Urban Development, Secretarial Representative of the Department of Transportation, Office of Economic Opportunity, Environmental Protection Agency, and the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration. The President was to designate one member of each council as the chairman. This executive order was unconstitutional because Article 4 of the U.S. Constitution prohibited the merging of the states, and guaranteed a government represented by elected officials. However, regional government was accepted, because it brought with it revenue-sharing funds. Here is how the 10 regions are organized, with the regional offices in parenthesis. 1. Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Boston, Connecticut, Rhode Island. 2. New York, New Jersey, Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico. 3. Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Maryland, Delaware, West Virginia, District of Columbia. 4. Kentucky, Tennessee, North Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Atlanta, South Carolina, Florida. 5. Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, Chicago, Indiana, Ohio. 6. New Mexico, Oklahoma, Texas, Dallas. Ft. Worth, Arkansas, Louisiana. 7. Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas City, Missouri. 8. Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, Denver. 9. Arizona, Nevada, Hawaii, California, San Francisco, American Samoa, Guam, and Mariana Islands, Marshall Islands, Micronesia. 10. Idaho, Washington, Seattle, Oregon, Alaska. In October 1976, Jimmy Carter said before the National Association of Regional Councils, NARC, "I believe that regional organization should be strengthened. If elected president, I intend first to upgrade the role of regional councils representing the federal government to assist state and local officials, as well as private citizens, in dealing with federal agencies. I also intend to encourage the development of regional councils representing state and local governments." Carter expanded the federal regional system on July 20, 1979, with Executive Order No. 12,149, to provide a structure for interagency and intergovernmental cooperation, to establish practical and appropriate liaison functions with state, tribal, regional and local officials. Each of the 10 councils were made up of a representative from each of the following agencies: Department of the Interior, Department of Agriculture, Department of Commerce, Department of Labor, Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, Department of Housing and Urban Development, Department of Transportation, Department of Energy, Environmental Protection Agency, Community Services Administration, Office of Personnel Management, General Services Administration, Action, Peace Corporation, Vista, Senior Citizen Programs, and other special volunteer programs, Small Business Administration. Federal Emergency Management Agency, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and the Regional Action Planning Commission. It included over 558 programs and block grants. The Department of Education was added later, after it separated from the Department of Health, Education and Welfare, which became the Department of Health and Human Services. On the same day, he signed Executive Order No. 12,148 Federal Emergency Management, which created the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, an agency within the Department of Justice, which oversees all of the federal agencies that have specific duties during times of emergency, such as the Federal Disaster Assistance Agency, and the Federal Emergency Broadcast System. It seems that only about 10% of its personnel are actually involved in disaster assistance. Being that it has the capability to assume government control if necessary, they have been given police powers which some researchers believe will be used as the enforcement branch of the regional government. In other words, a national police force. Its purpose was to merge every community's police force, transferring control of them to a central government. This was to be done through revenue-sharing funds providing special training programs to the local police, special communications equipment, and other things. The National Guard began receiving SWAT, special weapons and tactical team training to be part of this national police force. Located at the National Security Agency building in Fort Meade, Maryland, it has been reported that FEMA has been actively engaged in developing a computer database for CAPS, crisis action programs, to collect records on millions of Americans. The document contains no guarantees of freedoms that we now have under the Bill of Rights. Article I, Part A, Section 1. Freedom of expression shall not be abridged except in declared emergency and quod. In an emergency, the government will have the power to curtail communication, movement, and the right to assemble. It calls for public education and gun control. Article I, Part B, Section 8. The bearing of arms or the possession of lethal weapons shall be confined to police, members of the armed forces, and those licensed under the law and quod. The President will serve one 9-year term. Article I, Part B, Section 9, Subsection 8, to assist in the maintenance of world order and, for this purpose, when the President shall recommend, to vest jurisdiction in international legislative, judicial and administrative agencies, and there will be 2 vice presidents. 100 senators will be appointed by the President for lifetime terms, not elected, and there would be 400 members in the House of Representatives. Each of the 100 congressional districts will elect 3 for a 3-year term, and 100 will be elected by the entire country, to serve a 9-year term, and only they can become committee chairman. With the completion of the proposed new state's constitution, Vice President Nelson Rockefeller, President of the U.S. Senate, developed support for the introduction of ACIR 28, which called for an unlimited constitutional convention in 1976. Swift public opposition soundly defeated this attempt, so the convention's supporters then went to the states promoting a limited convention for the purpose of adding a balanced budget amendment. And quad. They were able to convince 32 of the required 34 states to pass resolutions calling for a convention. The last state to sign on was Missouri in 1983, but after that, the legislatures in 3 states, Alabama, Florida and Louisiana, realized the consequences of their actions and rescinded their call. It is ironic, but organizations claiming to be conservative seem to be the strongest supporters for a convention. Most notable are American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, National Taxpayers Union, NTU, Republican National Committee, RNC, and the Committee on the Constitutional System, CCS. In 1992, Ross Perot, who had become a political force to be reckoned with, publicly called for a constitutional convention. In guest appearances with Barbara Walters, Phil Donahue and Larry King, he stated that we needed a parliamentary government, and pledged that his people could get the remaining states needed for a constitutional convention call in their sleep. And quad. Another threat to our Constitution was the Conference of States, cause it was being peddled as a movement for the states to come together and discuss the need to balance the relationship between the states and the federal government in a co-equal partnership, even though our original Constitution intended for the states to be sovereign, and for the federal government to only have limited powers. Their first meeting was to be held in Annapolis, MD, July 6 to 9, 1995, with a historical reenactment of the 1786 Annapolis Convention, and the second had been planned for October 24 to 26, 1995, which, ironica illy, was the 50th anniversary of the establishment of the UN, in Philadelphia, PA, a reenactment of the 1787 convention. It was being funded by 3 private organizations which are associated with the Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations, ACIR, Council of State Governments, CSG, established in 1930 with funding from a Rockefeller grant, National Governors Association, NGA, and the National Conference of State Legislatures, NCSL, established in 1933 with funding from a Rockefeller grant. In December of 1994, the NCSL had a meeting in North Carolina where state legislators were told the Conference of States was a way for states to keep the federal government from encroaching on their sovereignty. So this CAS resolution was taken back to their respective state legislatures, and the first 12 states to ratify it was able to accomplish it through deceit by having legislative leaders introduce it, bypassing any committees so there would be no hearings, and bringing it to the floor for a quick vote. According to Michael Leavitt, the Republican governor of Utah, the goal of the resolution's proponents was to have 26 states pass it, although Governor Nelson of Nebraska was pressing for 34, which was the exact number of states needed to call for a constitutional convention. Leavitt, a member of the ACIR, told the Salt Lake City Tribune in 1994 that he wanted a constitutional convention. In a May 1994 position paper, he said that our government was outdated and old-fashioned, not suited for the fast-paced, high-tech, global marketplace we are entering. There is a better way. The better way, he suggested, seemed to be an end run around the Constitution, because the cost literature indicated their interest in passing constitutional amendments. He indicated his high expectations for what the meeting could accomplish. Congress tried to limit the convention's authority by stating it would meet for the sole and express purpose of revising the Articles of Confederation. As we all know, the delegates to the Great Constitutional Convention in 1787 in Philadelphia did much more than that. They threw out the Articles of Confederation and drafted a new Constitution. Though Article V of the Constitution indicates that 2/3 of the states must vote for a constitutional convention before Congress could call one, the COS was planning to use the same method the delegates did at the Annapolis Convention in 1786. Within 10 years, the Constitution that was originally drafted on June 12, 1776, and fully ratified by 1781, was no longer able to meet the needs of a growing nation. The delegates of Virginia, New York, Delaware, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, meeting in Annapolis, were charged with the task of amending the Articles of Confederation, and were to meet in Philadelphia for the sole and express purpose of revising them. The need for a stronger central government was expressed, one that didn't limit states' rights. However, upon meeting in Philadelphia in May 1787, they locked all the doors, and posted armed guards, and even closed all the windows, so they could deliberate in secret while they actually set up a new national government. Neither the Congress or the people could stop them. Their work was finished on September 17, 1787, and was fully ratified on May 29, 1790, and the Constitution of the United States was born, and is still in existence today. Many people were worried about this Conference of States, because nobody was really sure what could happen. Charles Duke, the Republican state senator from Colorado, said that the COS would be the edge of the sword that knocks the head off the Constitution. Case law mandates that members of a constitutional convention must be directly elected by the people, so they can act as their representatives to exercise the sovereign power of the state. Each state delegation to the COS would consist of the governor, and 2 leaders from each party in the state legislature, plus 2 alternates, 1 from each party, and therefore could be empowered with the necessary legal status as representatives of the people, should the decision be made to turn the meeting into a constitutional convention. Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich, RGA, and 33rd degree Mason Bob Dole, RKS, openly supported the COS, and on March 24, 1995, Republican Senators Hank Brown, CO, and Jesse Helms, NC, sponsored a Senate resolution which would give congressional authorization to transform the COS into a bona fide constitutional convention. They maintained that without this congressional approval, it would be in conflict with Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution, which does not allow any agreements between states. Ultimately, because only 14 state legislatures passed resolutions calling for their participation in the COS, which was short of the 26 needed, their organizational meeting scheduled for July 1995 was canceled. However, the same forces behind this movement planned to have a federalism summit in Cincinnati on October 22 with the support of the Council of State Governments, National Governors Association, and the National Conference of State Legislators. It is obvious that the Illuminati had taken a 2-prong approach to regional government. They have been working within the confines of the executive branch to get various executive orders passed, and they have also used their various finger organizations to study our existing constitution and recommend changes. All of their efforts may eventually culminate in a call for a constitutional convention that will spell the end of democracy as we know it in this country.